Well, we are 10 days into the shutdown with both sides refusing to budge in the partial government shutdown, and it starts to drag into the new year. When will it end? We don't know yet. Good morning, everyone. I'm Eric Shawn. We are live inside America's Newsroom.
Yeah, and I'm Heather Childers. Bill and Sandra, they're off today. Can you believe it's going to be another brand new year?
No.
Yeah.
Can't believe it's 2019 already.
With more non-negotiation going on. But they're trying. Democrats in the White House, they're stalled over funding for the president's long-promised wall. Nancy Pelosi, likely to take over as Speaker later this week, has said that House Democrats will propose a funding bill when the new Congress convenes on Thursday.
Meanwhile, both parties are playing the blame game, pointing fingers at each other when they appeared on the public affairs news programs this weekend.
It's going to end at some point because there are things that have not been funded that the Democrats desperately want to fund, be it HUD and some other things. But the truth is, there is nothing more important than the nation's security. It's our #1 job in the U.S. Congress.
If the president wants to continue to take a campaign promise that he made, which was to have Mexico pay for a wall, and say, no, the rules have changed. Now we're still going to build a wall, but we're going to have the American taxpayer pay for it. We're going to use the American taxpayer like an ATM machine. That's not the right direction to go.
People who just want to say wall, 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 want it to be a 4-letter word and not respect what Customs and Border Patrol and ICE tell us they need, which is enhancements at the border.
So, who will budge, blink, and cry uncle? Kevin Corke is following all this from the north lawn of the White House for us this morning. So, Kevin, the president is standing fast on this. He is very intent. He is talking about the wall, and it's just one of the many topics that is on his mind this morning.
Yeah, no doubt about that. If you've been watching his Twitter feed at all, you certainly have seen the president talking about the wall and a variety of topics. And to be candid, that actually continues a trend, Eric, dating back to yesterday. Let me take you to the president's favorite social media platform. He's talking about the wall and his predecessor in this particular tweet. He said President and Mrs. Obama built has a 10-foot wall around their D.C. mansion compound. I agree, totally necessary for their safety and security. The U.S. needs the same thing. A slightly larger version. The wall or fence or border security by any name is obviously meant to protect and defend this country, say White House officials. And that, by the way, Eric, is a sentiment echoed by the folks who face the real danger along the border firsthand.
When you're talking about 60,000 people flowing across the border, and we're talking about drug smuggling increasing between ports of entry, hard narcotics, synthetic opioids, methamphetamine coming 25% increase last year. We've seen it increase again the first 3 months of this year. We need a barrier to help us stop that, to push into the traffic into areas that we can control more effectively.
Alas, Democrats are digging in, Eric. They say the $5 billion for the wall simply won't happen, at least not yet. We'll see what happens in January when they take over the House.
Yeah,
Eric?
Just a couple of days. They're going to have that vote on Thursday. But meanwhile, speaking of the Democrats and the shutdown, any sign of movement at all? There was some discussion of possible compromise. Hearing anything from the White House perspective.
I got to tell you, on background, you have conversations, and they're obviously hopeful, right? You want something to happen. This is about the safety and security of the American people, but at least the public-facing message, Eric, is still the same. The president will get the funding one way or the other because they are doing right by the American public. Now, this, of course, means no deal without funding. And it also means this, and I think this is important. Until Democrat leaders get back from Hawaii and elsewhere, and the new leadership moves into position later on in the week, well, there is little chance we'll hear of any movement.
There's a lot of distrust in town, and I guess you can blame both sides for that. But after lunch, I've never been more encouraged. If we can get people talking, we can find our way out of this mess, and that would include around $5 billion for border security / wall / fencing, whatever you want to call it, in areas that make sense, and deal with another problem that's looming.
No public events for the president today, at least not yet. Should that change, I'll let you know, but for now, back to you.
All right, your reference to Hawaii, of course, Nancy Pelosi on the beach while the president remains behind the big desk, the resolute desk in the Oval Office. All right, Kevin, thank you. Heather?
With President Trump and congressional Democrats locked in this standoff, who blinks first? Let's bring in Stephen Nelson. He is the White House reporter for the Washington Examiner. Thank you very much for joining us, first of all.
Thanks for having me.
So you heard Senator Graham saying there, if we can get people talking, how do we do that? And what is the possibility of that happening moving forward this week?
Well, there reportedly already have been talks with a White House counterproposal to Democrats for something less than $5 billion. Of course, that was behind closed doors. What we do know is that pressure is going to build significantly for there to be some sort of a deal. Saturday is the end of the next federal pay cycle. That means that these 800,000 federal workers who hypothetically were going to be missing a paycheck actually will be missing a paycheck next week. And this is, of course, significant because lots of Americans live paycheck to paycheck, and the people who will be affected are people including ICE agents and people who work for the Border Patrol. So there's going to be a lot of pressure to get something. Both sides have to walk away with something. President Trump has been talking not only about the border wall, but also about the underlying issues that he feels justify the wall. You could see almost room for compromise, but of course compromise has not happened yet.
What about that? Senator Graham, the other thing that he talked about, he had lunch with the president on Sunday. He said one of the proposals that he floated to the president was this would marry the $5 billion figure, we would be back to that figure, along with some changes that might appeal to Democrats in terms of DACA.
Yeah, well, we could recall the only other major lengthy shutdown of the Trump era that was over DACA and immigration policy. That ended when there was an agreement that there were going to be votes on the Senate floor. Ultimately, nothing changed. Perhaps these two issues could be paired, but of course that is a complicated matter as well. That may just complicate things further. We'll have to wait and see, but that is a conceivable area, I suppose.
Democrats take over on January 3rd. What do you think will happen when Nancy Pelosi does come back to Washington?
Well, Nancy Pelosi has to come away with something that, shows that she's, I guess, won to an extent, and of course President Trump needs the same thing. What they have to do is come to a deal where both people come away with something, both sides gain something that's important to their base, and I imagine that that's going to be something that we're going to be seeing.
But why haven't Democrats come back with a counteroffer at this point? At the beginning of our conversation, you mentioned how Republicans seem to come down from the $5 billion mark down to, I think it was around $2.5 billion. But then Democrats said no deal, no discussion, and they left town.
Well, President Trump probably unintentionally made it easy for Democrats to dig in by saying that he would proudly claim ownership of the shutdown. And that he wanted the wall or this was going to happen. Democrats are very motivated to deny him his signature campaign promise of a wall. And by Trump saying that he would proudly claim credit, it made them easy. It reduced the political cost for Democrats. The political cost is going to increase, however, if federal workers miss a paycheck. With Democrats in control of the House. Yeah. So that equation may be reworking itself.
And perhaps Nancy Pelosi specifically is concerned about the cost to whether or not she gets the House speakership. And once that happens, maybe there will be some movement on her part. Thank you so much. Happy New Year, by the way.
Happy New Year.
And breaking this morning, just moments ago, one very prominent Democrat on the more progressive left side of her party taking a major concrete step towards potentially running for president. Massachusetts Senator Elizabeth Warren announcing she is launching an exploratory committee for the nation's highest office that allows potential candidates to legally begin raising money for the campaign. Warren happens to be the most high-profile Democrat so far to officially move closer to a 2020 White House bid. The Democratic field could be one of the largest in decades, with dozens reportedly interested in running. Well, the polls show Joe Biden, in the #1 spot for now.
We'll have more on that coming up. And we are learning some disturbing new details about the suspect accused of killing a California police officer last week. Authorities confirmed that the 33-year-old belonged to a violent Mexican-American street gang and was an illegal immigrant. He was captured 2 days after allegedly shooting Corporal Ronil Singh during a traffic stop. And Marianne Rafferty has more on all of this live from Los Angeles for us. Good morning, Marianne.
Good morning, Heather. Well, ICE officials now confirming they had no prior contact with the suspect accused of shooting and killing a California officer before his arrest on Friday. The arrest of Gustavo Perez Arriaga ended a statewide manhunt after the fatal death of Newman Police Corporal Ronald Singh, who had pulled over Arriaga on suspicion of DUI. Arriaga, a Mexican national, was in the U.S. illegally, had known gang affiliations, and had also been arrested for drunk driving, stoking intense debate over sanctuary laws in states like California.
Sanctuary cities endangered public safety and endangered law enforcement, and we've seen a tragic example. And unfortunately, this isn't the only one. There's been many people that have been killed by aliens released from sanctuary jails.
And while suspect Arriaga sits in a California jail accused of the murder of Officer Singh, a court appearance for the 32-year-old suspect is scheduled for Wednesday. There are some, including lawmakers, who say sanctuary laws do more good than harm when it comes to those in our country illegally.
These sanctuary laws actually help promote public safety by encouraging cooperation, encouraging communication between community and police.
Meanwhile, the family of Corporal Singh, a native of Fiji who had come to the U.S. to pursue his dream of becoming a police officer, is preparing to remember the fallen officer with funeral services scheduled for Saturday morning in downtown Modesto, California. Also, there's a viewing scheduled for this Friday starting at 5 p.m. Corporal Singh leaves behind a wife and a 5-month-old son. Heather?
Yeah, so tragic. Marianne, thank you.
Well, it's the last day in office for some of the top Trump administration officials, including Defense Secretary James Mattis. You know, Patrick Shanahan, his deputy, takes over the Pentagon at the start of the new year, meaning tomorrow, actually at 12 midnight tonight. So how will this affect our troops both at home and around the globe? We'll take a look with retired four-star General Jack Keane. He will join us at the bottom of this hour. And hear what Russian President Vladimir Putin is saying? Well, he's extending an olive branch to President Trump. You think the new year will mean a fresh start for relations between Washington and Moscow? We'll ask former Governor Mike Huckabee. He'll weigh in on that next as America's Newsroom continues.
People with type 2 diabetes are excited about the...
2019 is expected to be an eventful year for the Supreme Court as the justices prepare to take up cases that involve President Trump's most controversial policies, including a plan to add a citizenship question to the 2020 census, a case that would impact elections and state funding through 2030. The High Court begins a new session on January 7th.
Russian President Vladimir Putin says he wants to work on diplomatic relations with the U.S. in the new year. That's according to a holiday message he sent to President Trump over the weekend. The Kremlin saying in a statement, quote, Vladimir Putin emphasized that Russian-American relations are an essential factor in ensuring strategic stability and international security, and confirmed that Russia is open to dialogue with the United States on the widest possible agenda. So, can Putin be really trusted? Mike Huckabee, former governor of Arkansas, Fox News contributor, is here on that. Governor, trust Putin? I got a bridge in Brooklyn to sell you, or I can sell you a herd of jackalopes. What do you think?
Well, I mean, I don't think you can trust Putin, but on the other hand, it's in his best interest to try to have some kind of good relationship with the U.S. But here's a bigger question, Eric. Who does President Trump get to trust? If it's not Putin, can he trust Nancy Pelosi? I don't think so. Chuck Schumer? Probably not. Some of his former political hires, like Rex Tillerson? Obviously not. The trouble that President Trump has right now is that there are a number of people that he ought to be able to trust that he's not been able to. And he needs to have surrounding him some people who will give him their loyalty and their confidentiality, the two great political virtues. In the meantime, he's got to work with Putin. He's got to work with President Xi in China. He's got to work with a lot of people, including Kim Jong-un, people that he may not really trust, but he's got to at least try to find a way to build a relationship.
And he has stressed that relationship, for example, in dealing with some of our rivals and our adversaries. So on a personal level, you've been there. You understand this from being inside the room. How does that work? And does it really affect change and actually affect policy?
relationships really do matter, and the fact that he has sat down with many of these leaders and he's built relationships. I mean, look at the kind of cordial relationship he's built with President Abe of Japan, or for that matter, President Xi of China. Even though there's some pretty stiff tension right now between the countries, between the two personalities, there is a sense of warmth. I have been in the room with Donald Trump, and I'm going to tell you, he has an uncanny ability to size up other people, to size up a situation. He's good at that, and I think it's one of his great traits, both as a negotiator and, frankly, as a president. So I believe it's an important factor for him to sit down, whether it's with Putin or Erdogan or even people that, quite frankly, on the surface, there's no reason that we would trust them. But building a relationship is still critical and important, and I think he will do that.
Well, you know what critics say, that doesn't read it enough. He's not briefed, or doesn't rely on the briefings. He relies on his gut. In a way, does that put the foreign leaders off base? In fact, they don't know what they're going to get when Donald Trump sits down next to you. They know that they do not have someone who's scripted with policy coming out of the State Department.
I think that's his greatest attribute, is that when he goes into a session, whether it's with Putin or Kim Jong-un, I don't know whether they like him or not. Frankly, it doesn't matter. I think they fear him. And the greatest position that he can create for himself and for the United States is that the other leaders either fear him for what he will do or what he won't do. And that is a good quality for him to be able to project, because the one thing you don't want to do is to have a leader whose every move is so scripted by the people over in Foggy Bottom, i.e. the State Department, that they know exactly what he's going to do, what he's going to say, because somebody else has all laid it out for him. And frankly, that's how Washington has worked for decades. And look around, hadn't worked very well. This can't be worse.
And finally, you know, what does the president say to him about Ukraine, about his expansionism, about his election interference and the bombardment of our country, and as he tries to expand the Russian influence around the globe?
I think some of the harshest things that President Trump will say to Putin will be said in private, not in public. He took a beating for not standing up on the stage in Helsinki and, really going after Putin. But what people don't know is, what did he say in private? Donald Trump is the kind of guy who likes to take on his critics publicly through tweets and through, maybe bold statements and speeches. But that's the bluster that he presents. When it gets to the serious stuff, he doesn't do that in public. He does that behind the scenes, and he does it very effectively. But he doesn't necessarily, what I'd say, punch and tell.
And he took a beating for that private meeting with him, but they have imposed sanctions and taken some other tough tasks on that. And despite what's happening with Syria, which is causing a controversy, but we shall see. Governor, thank you for joining us in Little Rock, and as always, Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you, Eric.
Thank you. Heather?
Well, the fiancé of a missing Colorado mom due in court today to face first-degree murder charges in her death, as investigators still search for Kelsey Barrett's body. A live report from Colorado ahead. Plus, a special report on one of America's most notorious unsolved murders, the search for Teamsters boss Jimmy Hoffa.
A famous American who vanished from a public place in broad daylight. We need to know what happened.
Homeland Security investigating an apparent cyber attack targeting newspapers all across the country. The LA Times, Chicago Tribune, and Baltimore Sun all reported disruptions at their printing plants over the weekend, saying that a computer virus infected the systems, preventing some from getting the papers out on time. A motive remains unclear. Tribune Publishing says the personal data of its subscribers, though, was not compromised.
Recently there have been a lot of calls for the government to release the FBI files in the Russia investigation. But the Bureau can also be ordered to release the secret files in a notorious unsolved murder that has haunted this country for decades. What happened to labor icon Jimmy Hoffa? That is what I'm calling for. Release all of the FBI files so we know what's in them and what's being hidden. We report on all of it in our new special on Fox Nation, Riddle, the search for James R. Hoffa. Riddle, by the way, was his middle name. From former Attorney General Michael Mukasey to Hoffa investigators, And members of the Hoffa family, they are demanding the FBI files should be finally released. It remains the nation's most notorious mystery, the disappearance of Jimmy Hoffa. 4 decades after he vanished, the case can be solved by the stroke of a pen. I am calling on the government to release its secrets and finally reveal what is in the FBI's Hoffa files so the American public and the Hoffa family can learn exactly who killed him and why.
I believe the mob killed my father.
At this point, unless somebody's life was endangered by virtue of the information being released, I don't see any reason to keep it secret.
Keith Corbett ran the Hoffa case as the head of the U.S. Attorney's Organized Crime Strike Force in Detroit.
Investigative efforts are paid for by the taxpayers, and if there's no threat to somebody, I would be in favor of dispersing the information.
It was a hot summer afternoon, July 30th, 1975, when Hoffa, who had led the International Brotherhood of Teamsters, simply vanished. He was last seen getting into a maroon Mercury in the parking lot of the Marcus Red Fox restaurant in Bloomfield Hills, Michigan. It was believed he was headed to a sit-down with Detroit mob boss Anthony Tony Jack Giacalone and New Jersey mobster Anthony Tony Pro Provenzano to make peace. The suspects summoned to the grand jury in Detroit months later all took the fifth. Among them, one Hoffa friend, admitted hitman for Pennsylvania's Buffalino crime family, and Teamsters Delaware local president, Frank Sheeran, known as the Irishman. I met Sheeran in 2001 as part of a book proposal about him, and he told me he shot Jimmy Hoffa in this house in Detroit that is near the restaurant. He said Hoffa walked in and saw no one there, no meeting, no sit-down, and knew it was the end.
That's right inside the door, a foyer.
In 2004, we hired a forensic team of retired Michigan State Police investigators. We took up the tiles on the house's hardwood floor and found a suspected blood pattern that fit Sharon's story exactly.
It's going to turn green if it is blood, and lo and behold, it is.
The FBI was only able to extract DNA from 2. One drop was from an unknown male, the other deemed inconclusive.
Why do you think what we found in that floor is so important?
Well, what you found is all that's left of the body of Jimmy Hoffa.
Today, the FBI will not comment about the case, but with the informants likely dead, it is past time to release the secrets in full. The documents, made publicly available so far, have been heavily redacted. We should see what they say.
I would support any effort at full disclosure. A famous American who vanished from a public place in broad daylight. We need to know what happened. This cannot happen in America.
And we can know if those files are released. You can watch more. The show is Riddle, the search for James R. Hoffa, now available on our streaming service. Just go to Fox Nation.
Well, the last day of trading in 2018 about to get underway as Wall Street could end the year on a high note after a very rough December. We'll take a look at the big picture up next.
Hardworking families all across this country are seeing the best economy they've seen in generations. Anybody who's looking for a job right now has multiple opportunities to go and find a job. That's really positive.
Well, I got a Fox News alert for you, and it's a good one. Wall Street kicking off the final trading day of the year, and they are up about 200 points. The Dow opening, as you can see, flirting with 200. They just were over 200 a second ago. It's capping off a tough December, though, for the markets. The Dow losing about 9% so far this month. NASDAQ and S&P also taking some big losses. Man, it's been like a roller coaster up and down.
Yeah, so many different things impacting where the stocks are going up or down, but it would be great to end the year on a high note, wouldn't it?
I think so, especially they just were over 200 a second ago. It's capping off a tough December, though, for the markets. The Dow losing about 9% so far this month. NASDAQ and S&P also taking some big losses. Man, it's been like a roller coaster up and down.
Yeah, so many different things impacting where the stocks are going up or down, but it would be great to end the year on a high note, wouldn't it?
I think so, especially the fact that the Dow, we forget about this, zoomed from 18,000 to what, like 25, 26,000 since the president took office. So we'll see what happens in 2019. A lot of predictions there could be somewhat of a slowdown, but not this morning.
Yeah, don't want to make those predictions on the stock market right now, though. That's a dangerous territory. Well, President Trump's sparking some outrage, you could say, among Democrats after blaming them for the deaths of 2 migrant children from Guatemala. An 8-year-old boy, a 7-year-old girl died in Border Patrol custody in separate incidents this month. The president tweeting Saturday, any deaths of children or others at the border are strictly the fault of the Democrats and their pathetic immigration policies that allow people to make the long trek thinking they can enter our country illegally. They can't. If we had a wall, they would not even try. A White House counselor, Kellyanne Conway, defending the president's statement.
We are allowing these people to take their children on a perilous journey without correcting the falsities. They're being promised something that people can simply not deliver. I don't like some of the Democrats using these deaths as political pawns.
But isn't that exactly what the president just did?
No, the president is not doing that. The president does not want these children to come on the perilous journey to begin with.
So let's bring in our political panel, Capri Cafaro. She's a former Ohio Senate Democrat minority leader and executive in resident at American University School of Public Affairs, and conservative writer Kelly Jane Torrance. Thank you both for joining us.
Absolutely. Good morning.
So, Kelly, I will start with you. You know, placing the blame, but we have people on both sides of the border wall dying at this point.
Yeah, it's a terrible tragedy, and I wish President Trump had sort of mentioned that and talked about how terrible this is and showed a bit of empathy before turning to politics, if he must. And I think both Democrats and Republicans are using these children as political tools. It is very sad, but it certainly, does bring the human cost home of immigration policies, and we should be having a very good debate about this right now. But it's hard to do when people are using children as pawns and using emotion rather than reason to talk about these crucial matters.
Capri, if you get down to the facts of the matter, where we stand now, which is at a standstill, with neither side willing to bend, Republicans the last to make an offer, Democrats going on vacation. In 2006, Congress passed the Secure Fence Act. It mandated the construction of about 600 miles of the southern border, passed on a bipartisanship level, 283 votes in the House, 80 in the Senate, overwhelming. And then a couple years later, 2013, you had this Gang of Eight, this comprehensive immigration plan that also included funding for the wall, along with some movement on DACA. So why were Democrats willing to vote in favor of a border and border wall funding back in 2006 and 2013, but they aren't now?
No, I do actually think that part of this issue is because they do not want to give President Trump a political victory. But I've often said as well that I think that it is incumbent upon Democrats to come to the table and deal all on the wall. It is necessary. We need to open the government back up. But we also need to think about, we talk about the tragic deaths of these children at the border. And we should not be pointing fingers right now. There is obviously something wrong, something broken within our system. We have not had comprehensive immigration reform for real since 1986 under a Republican president of the United States, Ronald Reagan. This isn't about Democrats or Republicans. This is about really, really bad circumstances in Central America. And regardless of our immigration policy, these people are going to do what they're going to do because they think that anything is better than their current circumstances. So we need to work with the United Nations, with Mexico, and with Central American nations to figure out how we fix the humanitarian crisis and the crime so they don't come to begin with. Wall or no wall, that's not going to have an impact.
Kelly Jane, this is nothing new, albeit these are 2 children. There have been deaths as a result of the trek that people make in to try to cross the border between 2012 and 2015. I think the numbers were somewhere around 18 migrants died, although those migrants were older, between the age of 24 and 49. That was during the Obama administration. So we've known that there's a problem for a while.
Yeah, you're right, Heather. And this has been something that's been happening for not just a few years, but for decades. And I think a lot of people
are dying. A number of people are dying making their way here that we don't even hear about because they die before they make it here. And of course, think about Cuba. People coming from Cuba ever since that country plunged into darkness with the communist takeover. People have been dying. Yeah, and the fact that they're willing to take what they know is, as Kellyanne Conway says, a perilous journey, really drives home how bad off these countries are and how America really is that beacon of hope for people. Now, the question is there something we can do to welcome asylum seekers when we can, but also to help people that, as Capri said, in their own countries and try to make things better. And that's why, I think President Trump has a difficult decision here. He talked about cutting off aid to some of these countries because they're not sealing their borders and they're letting people come all the way up from there to the United States. But cutting off aid, might that make the problem worse? I think you're going to need more than just aid to help people. You got to, these are the basis of their societies often is the problem.
It does seem like, Capri, that it has become an issue of semantics at this point. Do you call it a wall, or do you call it steel slats, or do you call it a fence? And honestly, that's kind of pathetic that we've gotten to that point, because we're talking about border security. We're talking about finding a way to keep people from dying who are trying to get here. And we are now talking about, what do we call it?
Yeah, I agree with you. I think it's stupid. I think that, to focus on semantics of the wall and what the wall may symbolize is just, pretty childish, to be honest. And I apologize for my voice. I'm coming down with a really bad cold. So I apologize to the viewers and to you on that. But it is absolutely, I think, ridiculous that we're focusing on a word. We need to deal with comprehensive, enhanced border security. And that doesn't just include a physical barrier, whatever you want to call it, but also, giving the tools necessary to our INS and those that are the Border Patrol on the southern border, and also using technology. We don't just want to waste tax dollars for no good reason. We want to make sure that we are spending money that is effective and doing the job necessary.
And the Trump administration says that is what they're talking about. They're talking about all of those things. They just need Democrats to come back to the table, and hopefully they'll come back to the table at least by Thursday, and we'll see if there's any movement on that. Thank you both for joining us. We appreciate it, and Happy New Year to you.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Well, speaking of that new year, it could be a rainy start to 2019. If you plan to go out tonight, stay with us. We'll give you the New Year's Eve forecast. Plus, that shakeup at the Pentagon, the guy on the right, Patrick Shanahan, replacing the guy on the left, General Mattis, as acting defense secretary tomorrow. What that change at the top could mean for our troops overseas. There's retired four-star General Jack Keane waiting in the wings. He'll be with us in just a moment to weigh in on that as America's newsroom rolls on.
What makes this simple salad the best?